There is a moment that people who grew up visiting older relatives in the 1950s describe in almost exactly the same way, even when they've never compared notes. You walked through the front door, and before you could see the room properly, before you could notice the furniture or the curtains or anything you could name, you felt it. Something landed on you that was warm and quiet and ordered. The room had a smell that was clean but not chemical. The light was soft, the cushions on the sofa sat the way cushions are supposed to sit. Nothing was out of place, nothing was waiting to be dealt with, and you felt immediately and without thinking about it, that you were somewhere that someone genuinely cared for. That feeling had a name even if nobody called it that. It was once simply called home. Most of us don't walk into our own living rooms and feel that anymore. We walk in and see the throw blanket that got pulled off the sofa 2 nights ago and never went back. We see the mug on the side table from this morning, or possibly yesterday morning. We see the remote controls arranged the way they landed, not the way anyone put them. We see surfaces that are technically tidy but somehow still feel cluttered. And we tell ourselves we'll sort it before the weekend, or before someone comes over, which is the same thing. The 1950s woman did not wait for the weekend. She did not wait for a guest. And the room she kept was not the result of more space, better furniture, or some impossible standard that only worked before women had jobs or ambitions or complicated lives. It was the result of a set of habits, small, daily, deliberate, that have almost entirely disappeared. Not faded, disappeared. Nobody passed them down. Nobody explained why they worked. And so the living room, which was once the heart of the home, became the place where the family drops things on the way to the kitchen. That is what this video is about. The specific habits that made those rooms feel the way they felt, and why, if you brought even a few of them back, your living room would feel like a different place within a week. If this kind of forgotten home wisdom is something you want more of, subscribe before you forget. This channel covers the exact systems and habits that used to be passed from mother to daughter and somehow got lost along the way. And while you're thinking about it, where are you watching from today? Because I always want to know, did your grandmother's living room feel different from the one you have now? Tell me in the comments. I have a feeling the answer for most of you is yes. Habit 1. The morning airing. The first thing the 1950s woman did with her living room each morning was not pick things up. It was open a window. This sounds almost too simple to be worth mentioning, but it was not incidental. It was a practice, and it had a purpose. A room that has been closed overnight fills with stale air, the warmth of bodies, the heaviness of sleep, the dull quality of air that has had nothing new introduced to it for 8 hours. You don't always notice it when you walk in because you've been in the house all night yourself. But the room carries it. It feels a little flat, a little closed, and no amount of tidying fully corrects it. She opened the window first, even in cooler months, even just for 10 or 15 minutes. The room breathed, fresh air moved through the curtains and reached the corners, and the upholstery and the rug, carrying out what the night had left behind. Then she closed the window and began the rest of the reset, and the room already smelled different, already felt different. She hadn't cleaned anything yet, she had just let the outside in. We have almost entirely lost this habit. Modern homes are better insulated and harder to air quickly, and central heating made it feel unnecessary. But the result is that most living rooms smell faintly of their own staleness without the people in them ever noticing. It becomes the background. It becomes what the room smells like, which is not the same as what a room should smell like. Airing the room was the foundation. Everything else she did to the living room that morning was built on top of it. The cushions she was about to straighten would land in a room that already smelled clean. The surfaces she was about to clear would feel genuinely fresh, not just tidy. The morning airing was the reset before the reset. Habit 2. The daily cushion reset. This was not decorating. It is important to be clear about that. Because when modern people talk about cushions, they talk about throw pillows and whether they match and how many is too many. The 1950s cushion reset was not an aesthetic decision made once when the sofa was purchased. It was a daily physical act, and it took perhaps 3 minutes. Every morning after the window was open, she moved through the living room and returned the cushions to their shape. She fluffed them, pressed the corners back in, smoothed the covers, stood them upright. Cushions that had been slept against or leaned into overnight came back to themselves. The sofa, which without this attention looks like something deflating, looked like a sofa again. This matters for a reason that has nothing to do with cushions specifically. When the seating in a room looks cared for, the whole room looks cared for. When cushions are flat and sideways and half on the floor, a room reads as abandoned, even if nothing else is wrong with it. It is a signal, and we receive that signal whether we're conscious of it or not. A room with properly arranged seating says someone is in charge here. Someone tends this. The daily cushion reset is almost entirely gone from modern homes. Cushions get arranged when guests are coming, then stay wherever the last person left them until the next occasion. Which means most of the time, the heart of the living room is sending the wrong signal. Habit 3, the no clutter on surfaces rule. This was perhaps the single most consistent habit across 1950s living rooms, and it is the one that creates the most visible difference in a room's feeling. The surfaces were kept clear, not bare. There is a distinction. Bare surfaces feel cold and unfinished, like a room that has been emptied for a move. Clear surfaces, on the other hand, feel intentional and deeply inviting. There might be one lamp, one small dish, one framed photograph, one seasonal object, but nothing else. Nothing waiting to be put away somewhere else. Nothing that belonged in another room and hadn't made it there yet. The side table had a lamp and perhaps a coaster. The mantel had its centerpiece and nothing that wasn't chosen. The coffee table, if there was one, held what was meant to be there. A small vase, a set of coasters. The current week's magazine, and then it was cleared in the evening. Surfaces were not storage. They were display, but extremely restrained display. Modern surfaces tend to become the nearest flat place. Chargers accumulate. Medicines migrate from the bathroom. Children's things land and stay. Receipts, batteries, books that were going to be returned to the shelf. Objects without homes, all of it gathers on the nearest surface. And then, because it has always been there, stops being seen. The room adjusts around its own clutter until the clutter is the room. She did not let that process begin. The surface rule was not a decluttering project she returned to every few weeks. It was a daily line she held. One or two things that are chosen, everything else, somewhere else. And once the surfaces were held and the air was fresh and the cushions had been returned to their shape, the room was already doing most of its work. But what she did with light, that came next. Because a tidy room in the wrong light still feels wrong. There is something that tidiness alone cannot fix. You can straighten every cushion, clear every surface, and open every window, and a room can still feel flat. It can still feel like a waiting room, like a space you pass through rather than a place you actually want to sit down in. The 1950s woman understood this, even if she never put it into those exact words. She understood that a room has an atmosphere, built from things you feel before you consciously notice them. First, the warm glow of the light. Then, the subtle presence of scent, and a focal point for the eye to rest on. These were not luxuries, she added. They were part of the daily habit of the room. The modern living room tends to ignore all three. It is furnished, but not composed. The overhead light stays on because it is the easiest light to turn on. Scent comes from a synthetic plug-in, and surfaces hold whatever landed there last. There is no focal point. There is nowhere for the eye to rest. It never quite feels finished. Habit 4. The reading lamp ritual. She did not turn the overhead light on in the evening. This is the simplest way to say it, and it sounds like a small thing until you try it yourself and notice how completely different a room becomes. The overhead light, the central ceiling fixture that most living rooms rely on as the default, flattens everything. It removes shadows. It makes the room look exactly as large as it is. No more, no less. It is efficient and unflattering, and it makes a room feel like a space that needs to be seen clearly, rather than a space where you might want to stay a while. It is the light of function, not the light of comfort. The 1950s woman understood the difference between those two things. In the evening, before anyone sat down, before the family settled in after dinner, she turned on the reading lamp. Sometimes, too, a lamp near the armchair, a lamp on the side table. The overhead light stayed off, or was used briefly, and then replaced. The room that resulted was entirely different from the same room under a ceiling fixture. Corners became soft, the furniture looked warmer. The whole space contracted slightly in the best possible way. It felt closer, more contained, more like somewhere you were meant to be. The reading lamp ritual was also a signal to the household. When the lamps were on and the overhead was off, the day had shifted into its quieter register. The working hours were done. The room was ready for reading, for conversation, for simply sitting. Light was used to mark time, not just to make a space visible. We have largely replaced this with whatever the overhead fixture does, supplemented now by the blue light of screens, which does the opposite of everything a lamp was designed to do. The room never transitions. The evening never really begins. It is just the continuation of the same flat light that was on at 2 in the afternoon, until someone turns it all off and goes to bed. Turning a lamp on before you sit down costs nothing. It takes 4 seconds. And it changes the room more completely than almost any other single habit on this list. Habit 5. The habit of managed fragrance. The 1950s living room had a smell. Not a purchased smell, not a sprayed smell, not the industrial-strength synthetic lavender that comes out of a plug-in device and eventually becomes indistinguishable from the smell of the outlet itself. It had a smell that came from the room being alive, from the window that had been opened that morning, from the beeswax on the furniture, from the bowl of fruit on the side table, from the dried flowers in the corner, from the faint warmth of a candle that had been lit an hour ago and then snuffed. Scent in the 1950s home was managed, not purchased as a solution to its absence. There is a difference between a home that smells good because it has been tended, and a home that smells good because something is actively masking what it would smell like otherwise. One of those smells like a home, the other smells like a product. And most people, on some level, can feel that distinction even when they can't name it. She kept a bowl of seasonal fruit on the table, not only because it looked right, but because apples and oranges in a ceramic bowl in a warm room have a faint sweetness that belongs to living things. She used real candles when she used them at all, tallow or beeswax, because they burned cleanly and left a warmth in the air that synthetic wax never quite replicates. She sometimes kept a small bunch of dried lavender or rosemary near the window, where the air movement would carry it through the room without announcing itself too loudly. None of this was expensive. Most of it grew in the garden or cost very little at the market. The point was not to perfume the room aggressively, that would have been considered poor taste actually, but to make sure the room had a living quality to it, that it smelled like something real was inside it. Does your living room have a scent that came from the room itself or from something plugged into the wall? It is worth asking, because one of those answers means the room is alive and the other means it is being managed. Habit 6. The decorative centerpiece. Every 1950s living room had one. A focal point on the main table, or on the mantelpiece if there was one, or on the shelf that anchored the room's main wall. One object, or one carefully composed small group of objects, that the eye moved toward when it entered the room. Something that had been chosen, not accumulated. Something that changed when the season changed. In spring, it might be a small vase of cut flowers from the garden, nothing elaborate, just 3 or 4 stems in the right container. In autumn, it might be a grouping of dried seed heads and a candle in amber glass. At Christmas, it was something seasonal. In the plain months of January and February, it might be a single ceramic piece or a bowl of pine cones, or simply a beautiful object that she had set there deliberately and positioned properly, not pushed to the side to make room for something else. The centerpiece habit served 2 purposes that reinforced each other. The first was visual. A room with a focal point has somewhere for the eye to land and rest, which makes the room feel more composed than it would without one. A room without a focal point has an eye that wanders, lands on something random. The remote control, a stray charger, the corner where things got pushed, and does not come back with any satisfaction. The second purpose was temporal. A centerpiece that changed with the season marked the passage of time inside the room. The room was connected to the world outside it. It told you what time of year it was, what was growing or finishing, and what was coming in the season ahead. It gave the room a relationship to the calendar that modern living rooms have almost entirely lost. Does your living room have a centerpiece? One object that you placed there because you wanted it there, not because it was the thing nearest to hand when you were tidying. If not, that is the single easiest habit to begin. One object, one surface, chosen deliberately. And once the room had light and scent and something worth looking at, what kept it from drifting back into disorder? Across the ordinary days of the week was a set of smaller habits that most people have entirely abandoned. The way she handled the magazines, the flowers she kept fresh, and the standard she held for the room that had nothing to do with whether a guest was expected. A room can be aired and lit and scented and still fall apart by Wednesday. The habits in the first two parts of this video created a foundation, a morning reset, a way of managing light and fragrance and the eye's resting place. But a foundation is not a system. What turned the 1950s living room from a well-started space into a room that held its warmth across the entire week was a set of quieter, more persistent standards. Standards that applied on Tuesday afternoon as much as they applied on Saturday before company came. Standards that most people in modern homes have quietly dropped without ever making a conscious decision to drop them. These are the habits that live in the middle of the week, the ones nobody sees being done. The ones that only become visible in their absence, when the magazines are in a heap, when the flowers have gone brown and nobody replaced them, when the room starts to feel like it belongs to the week's leftovers rather than to the people who live there. Three habits in particular held the 1950s living room together across the ordinary days, and all three have essentially vanished. Habit 7, the fanned magazine habit. This one sounds almost decorative, and it was, but it was also something more than that, and the distinction matters. In the 1950s living room, the current magazines were arranged on the coffee table or the side shelf, not stacked in a pile the way a waiting room does it, not shoved into a basket, not left open to the page someone stopped reading 3 days ago. They were fanned slightly or laid flat in a neat overlap or stood in a small wooden rack by the armchair. The titles were visible. The arrangement was intentional. It took perhaps 45 seconds. Why does this matter? Because a magazine left face down and open, or thrown onto a pile of its predecessors, does something specific to a room. It says this space is in the middle of something. It says things are being left here temporarily, on their way somewhere else, except they never actually get there. A room full of things in transit. Magazines, glasses, books left spine up. Papers that haven't been dealt with feels like a room that is perpetually behind, like the room itself is waiting for someone to finally sort it out. The fanned magazine was a visible signal that the room was current and attended. It said someone had been here this morning and had taken 30 seconds to make this right. It also said something about the household's relationship to its own leisure, that reading was a practice worth presenting. This habit from the past applies perfectly well to modern life. You may not keep physical magazines at all, but most living rooms have something equivalent. Books, remotes, or a tablet. The items that live on the coffee table by habit. The 50s woman would ask, are these arranged or just wherever they landed? The difference between those two things, visually and atmospherically, is not small. Habit 8, fresh flowers or a seasonal plant. She did not wait for a special occasion to put flowers in the living room. This is the part that surprises people most when they hear it. Because somewhere in the decades since, flowers became a gesture, something you receive or put out only for a special event. In the 50s home, flowers were a weekly rhythm, and they were never expensive. She cut them from the garden when the garden was producing. Whatever was in season, whatever was available. A few stems of whatever the late summer had left. Some branches of autumn berries. Forced bulbs in late winter, sitting in a simple glass jar on the windowsill where the light hit them in the morning. In the months when nothing was growing outdoors, she kept a houseplant in the room. Not a collection of houseplants arranged like an indoor garden center, but one, a good one, tended properly in a pot that suited the room. The fresh flower habit did something that no decorative object can replicate. It connected the room to the season in a way that was living and changing and slightly impermanent. A vase of garden roses in July looks like July. Dried seed heads in November look like November. The room told you where you were in the year. It reminded you that time was moving, that the world outside was doing something, that the home was not sealed off from it. The other thing flowers and plants did, and this was understood instinctively, even if it was never articulated as a theory, was signal care. A fresh flower in a room is only fresh if someone put it there recently and removed the one before it when it began to go. Dead flowers in a vase are worse than no flowers. Brown-edged leaves on a neglected plant communicate the opposite of what a tended plant communicates. The habit only works if it is maintained, which is exactly the point. It required a weekly act of attention. Someone had to notice and choose and replace. That noticing is what made the room feel loved. When did you last put something living in your living room that you grew, cut, or chose yourself, rather than received from someone else? It is a small question with a larger answer behind it. Habit 9. The guest-ready standard applied every day. This is the habit that separates the 1950s approach to the living room most completely from the modern one. Not in terms of effort, the effort was not enormous, but in terms of philosophy, in terms of what a living room is for and who it is being kept for. The modern living room is kept for guests. It is tidied before someone comes over, arranged before a gathering, made presentable for an audience. The rest of the time it operates under a different, lower standard. The private standard, the family standard. The standard that says it doesn't really matter because it's just us. And the result of that divided standard is a room that the people who actually live in it never fully enjoy, because it is never quite at its best for them. They get the version of the room that exists between tidy occasions. They get the room in its in-between state, waiting to be made right for someone else. The 1950s woman did not operate this way. The guest-ready standard was not a performance for visitors. It was the standard she held for the room because the room deserved it, because the family deserved it, because the ordinary Tuesday evening at home deserved a room that felt like somewhere rather than a space in transit. She kept the living room the way she kept it, not because she was expecting anyone, but because this was simply what the living room was. This was its condition. This was what it meant to tend a room. The guest-ready habit is arguably the deepest shift in this entire list because it is not really a cleaning habit or a tidying habit. It is a decision about what daily life is worth. It says that the people who live here every day deserve the same care as the people who visit once a month. That the room at 9 o'clock on a Wednesday night should feel as considered as the room at 7 o'clock on a Saturday when friends are coming for dinner. That standard, quiet, consistent, never announced, was what held the room across the whole week. And it made the final habit of the day, the one she performed every night before she went to bed, feel less like a chore and more like a completion. Because a room kept to a daily standard doesn't need to be rescued each evening. It only needs to be returned. There is a version of the 1950s living room that almost nobody talks about because it happened after everyone had stopped looking. After the evening was over, after the children were in bed, and the conversation had wound down, and the lamp by the armchair had been on for 3 hours. It happened in the last 10 minutes before the household went to sleep, and it was so quiet and so unremarkable that it left no photographs behind, no magazine spreads, no documentation of any kind. It was simply something she did, the way she had always done it, the way her mother had done it before her. She moved through the living room one final time. Habit 10. The before-bed evening reset. It did not take long. Modern minds hear tidying and picture an exhausting project at day's end. It was not that. It was 10 minutes at most, often closer to 5. The room was kept to a standard all day, so nothing accumulated far from its place. She moved the cushions back to their positions. She cleared the surfaces, a glass, an open book, or knitting set down mid-row. She folded the throw blanket and returned it to its place on the chair or sofa. She checked the floor. Nothing left there that belonged elsewhere. She took the glasses and cups to the kitchen. She straightened the magazines. She removed the flowers if they had begun to turn. And then she turned off the reading lamp and the room was dark and it was finished. The room had been returned to itself. That phrase matters. Returned to itself. Not cleaned, not transformed, not rescued from disorder, simply brought back to its own natural state. The state it was in that morning after the window had been opened and the cushions had been reset and the surfaces had been cleared. The evening reset closed a loop that the morning reset had opened. The room began each day from the same point. It did not carry yesterday's disorder into today. It did not ask the new morning to deal with what the previous evening had left behind. Think about what the opposite of this feels like. You wake up and walk into the living room, and the throw is on the floor where it slid off the sofa sometime around 11 o'clock. The glasses from last night are still on the side table. One cushion is on the floor. The magazines are in the configuration they reached after someone pulled one out from the middle of the arrangement and never put it back. The room looks like the end of something, not the beginning. And so the morning begins with a faint sense of being behind, of the day already carrying a deficit before it has properly started. That feeling is small, but it is persistent. It colors the first hour. It makes the room feel like it belongs to yesterday. She did not give yesterday that power over today. The evening reset was the mechanism that prevented it. 10 minutes of deliberate movement through the room, returning each thing to where it lived, and the room was ready. Not for guests, not for a photograph, for tomorrow morning. For the family who would wake up and walk in and find it the same as it always was. Ordered, clean-aired, the lamp unlit but ready to be turned on again when the evening came back around. This habit has almost entirely disappeared from modern homes, and its disappearance has consequences that are quiet but real. We have replaced the evening reset with collapse. The end of the day arrives and the body goes horizontal, and the room stays wherever it landed, and the television runs until someone falls asleep. There is no closing ritual. The day does not end so much as it stops, and the room accumulates, night after night, the evidence of evenings that were never properly finished. The 1950s woman understood something about rhythm that modern life has largely edited out. That days need to close in order to open cleanly. That a room left in disorder overnight does not simply wait patiently, it sets the tone for the morning. That the last 10 minutes of the day, spent moving quietly through the room that the household lives in, is not time lost to tidying. It is an investment in tomorrow. It is the act of saying, "This room matters. This family deserves to begin the day in a room that has been cared for." When you look at all 10 habits together, the morning airing, the cushion reset, the clear surfaces, the lamp ritual, the managed fragrance, the centerpiece, the arranged magazines, the fresh flowers, the guest-ready standard, the evening reset, they form something that is greater than the sum of their parts. They form a relationship between a woman and a room, a daily, reciprocal relationship in which she gave the room attention and the room gave the household warmth. Not warmth as a design concept, warmth as a feeling. The feeling that someone is in charge here, that this space is loved, that it is worth sitting down in. The 1950s living room did not feel the way it felt because of the wallpaper or the furniture or the particular shade of the carpet. Those things were often modest. The homes were frequently small. The budgets were tight in ways that modern households would find difficult. None of that is being romanticized here, because the period had real limitations and real difficulties that are not worth pretending away. But inside those limitations, something was preserved and practiced daily that we have lost. A set of small habits, each one taking minutes, that collectively made a room feel inhabited in the fullest sense of the word. A set of small habits, each one taking minutes, that collectively made a room feel inhabited in the fullest sense of the word. A set of small habits, each one taking minutes, that collectively made a room feel inhabited in the fullest sense of the word. Not occupied, not used, inhabited, cared for. Returned to each morning and closed properly each night. Returned to each morning and closed properly each night. Tended the way a garden is tended, not transformed all at once, but visited regularly with attention so that it never falls very far from what it is supposed to be. The modern living room feels like a Netflix waiting room, and that phrase is harsher than it sounds. Because a waiting room is a space where nobody has any particular investment in how it feels. You wait, you leave, someone else waits. Nobody owns it, nobody tends it. It exists to be occupied, not to be loved. And that is precisely what the living room has become for many households, a place to wait out the evening until sleep arrives. A room full of surfaces that nobody chose and light that nobody adjusted. And a smell that came from a plug socket rather than from anything living. The habits in this video are not complicated. They do not require a renovation or a budget or a free weekend. They require only a decision that the living room is worth daily attention, that the people who live there deserve the room at its best, not just the room in its in-between state. That 10 minutes in the morning and 10 minutes at night can change the feeling of a space more completely than any piece of furniture you could buy to replace it. Start with 1. The lamp in the evening. The window in the morning. 1 stem of something in a small glass jar. The cushions return to their shape before you leave the room. 1 habit, held consistently, begins to change the room's atmosphere within days. Not because the habit is magic. Because attention is. Because a room that is noticed daily feels different from a room that is ignored until it becomes embarrassing. The room was never the point. The routine was. And the routine can begin again, any morning, with a window opened and a cushion straightened. And 5 minutes given to a space that has been waiting, rather patiently, to be treated as somewhere worth caring for. If this kind of quiet, forgotten wisdom is what you come here for, subscribe so you don't miss what's coming. There is a great deal more where this came from, and none of it requires buying anything new. Every habit, every system, every small piece of knowledge that used to be passed from one generation to the next, and somehow got lost along the way. That is what this channel is for. And if any of these 10 habits made you think of a room you remember, or a woman you knew who kept her home this way, leave that in the comments. Those memories matter more than you might think.